Welcome to Que Pasa, HSIs, a podcast dedicated to everything Hispanic serving institutions. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, bringing you the news on what's happening in HSIs. Join us as we explore the history and evolution of HSIs, culturally relevant and liberatory practices, current and emerging research with HSIs, and the policies that shape servingness.
Saludos, HSI familia, and welcome to the summer edition of Que Pasa HSIs. Today's episode is a special episode that we're bringing to you, and it's going to feature me, our host of Que Pasa HSIs, and the person behind the scenes who does all the editing and gets you every episode crisp and clean, which is Alan A.C. Williams. And he is the person who logs in with us, does all the recording, does all the production, and make sure that y'all get your episodes. So what we're going to be talking about today is some of our favorite episodes. And we have both listened to every episode multiple times, over and over again, including the recording. So we have a lot to say about all these episodes. So we're going to talk to you about some of our favorites and talk to you about why we think the podcast is important. Also, a special feature of today's episode is it is going to include video. So if you're listening on the audio, go ahead and jump over to our YouTube channel and you can see us in real life as we record this episode, because we're playing with the idea of having video as part of the podcast as well. So we're going to start with the first question. And the first question is for Alan. Who is Alan A.C. Williams, and how do you know Dr. Garcia?
Awesome. So I'm excited to be on the other side of the podcast. So as you mentioned already, I am the production manager for Que Pasa HSI's podcast. I am a student affairs practitioner and a doc student at the University of Buffalo, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today. I had the privilege of getting to know you during our time together at the University of Pittsburgh in the Higher Education Student Affairs program. So now I'm going to turn it back over to you. Who is Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, and how did the idea of the podcast become a reality?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not going to go deep into who I am because hopefully y'all know a lot about me because you're regular listeners. But if you're new to the podcast, briefly, I am a professor at UC Berkeley. I'm a professor of higher education. And some call me the queen of HSIs or La Reina de HSIs because I am one of the leading voices of HSIs. There are a ton of amazing scholars doing amazing HSI work. There's also a ton of HSI practitioners I learn from every single day. So I in no way think that I'm the only voice, but I have had the honor and privilege of being one of the voices that brings HSIs to the masses. And one of the ways we do that is through the podcast. And the podcast became an idea probably before COVID, because during COVID, when we were in lockdown, I did have a session with my partner, and we were really thinking through what was the podcast going to look like. And by that point, I had already been thinking about the podcast for at least a year before that. So I would say maybe around 2018, 2019, I started thinking, how can, well, one, I knew podcasts were really accessible to people and people really liked podcasts. But I wanted to think about how do we get knowledge to people that's not in a book form or that's not in some way you have to download an article, because those of us that are scholars that download articles regularly know we hit a paywall. So if you get that link to an article you want to read and you click it, chances are you're going to hit a paywall, and it's going to be something like $36 to read an article. And I don't think that knowledge should be commodified in that sort of way. I think it should be free, and particularly knowledge that is for minoritized people, for helping minoritized people to do better work with and for minoritized folks. So I thought the podcast was a way to make knowledge free and accessible. What it's also turned into is a way to bring you the most up-to-date servingness chisme. Like, what are we talking about right now in the HSI work? That's what we get to do on the podcast, is bring you the stuff that's really happening on the ground right now, research that hasn't even hit a journal yet, we get to talk about on the podcast. So it became a reality with a lot of people surrounding me who really believed in my idea, including Alan, including Estefania Toledo, who does all the social media. So shout out to her. Anytime you open your Instagram or your LinkedIn or X and you see Que Pasa HSI, that's her work behind the scenes as well. So we come together and we make this happen. So it really is a team effort. It really is an effort of people who do believe in this work as much as I believe in it. So it's great. It's a lot of fun, and we do enjoy this work. So next question is, why do you think Que Pasa HSIs is an important podcast for practitioners?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say, firstly, it's a convenient, flexible way to stay in the know about best practices, current trends, and relevant research, as you already mentioned. And so it's easily accessible as it is available on all platforms that have podcasts. And so you can listen to this podcast on your daily commute or even while exercising, making it easy to integrate learning into your busy schedules. And so in addition to that, I would say that even though I don't work at a HSI, I still learn a lot about serving and also just understanding current trends around higher education and best practices on how to support Hispanic and Latino students. And so, lastly, I would say, which, again, speaks to the practitioner part, it is filled with practical tips and strategies that can be applied in our daily work. And so my question for you is, why do you think Que Pasa HSI is an important podcast for researchers?
Good question. But first, I'm going to say I echo that you can listen to it while you're working out. I listen to every episode while I'm running. So everybody listens where they listen. I don't have a daily commute, thankfully. So running is where I do consume Que Pasa HSIs. Why do we think it's important for researchers? So I think, and other people maybe think differently, but I think we talk about things that are researchable on the podcast that haven't been researched yet. So for folks that are listening in who are scholars, who are doctoral students, who are rising doctoral students and thinking about entering doc programs, or folks that are trying to come up with topics that they want to research that are significant to them, I think that we brainstorm ideas without that really being the original goal of HSI or of Que Pasa HSIs. We do grapple with questions that can be researchable that haven't been researched yet. And so I think that's why it's good for researchers. There are also episodes that feature, I would say, feature HSI scholars, and those episodes obviously dig deep into the research. A lot of our episodes are practitioner based, and our guests are practitioners at HSIs. And so we can learn from them as well, but some of them are specifically about the current research. So I think that's important in that sort of way to get knowledge about what our most current HSI research is. So let's get into the episodes. This summer, what we did, thanks to Estefania, is we created a list of summer reading lists by themes. And so what we did is we went through and we thought, what are the themes that have emerged over 40 episodes? We're now 40 episodes in, summer 2024, we have 40 episodes, 4 seasons. And we created lists for you to listen to while you are waiting for season 5, which is currently in production. And we'll get it to you when we get it to you. But currently, you can listen to old episodes. And so we want to touch on some of those reading lists and ways for you to think about, especially if you're a new listener, where do I start? Right? Where should I start listening to Que Pasa HSIs? Because 40 episodes is a lot. And so we're going to touch on some of our favorites based on these summer reading lists. So the question I have for you, Alan, is which is your favorite Que Pasa HSI episode on the playlist that hasn't hit the social medias yet, but y'all will see it soon? Interplay of policy and servingness, which we have a list of different episodes that hit on the interplay of policy and servingness. Which is your favorite episode from that list and why?
That's a hard one. I'm gonna have to go with navigating Anapesi and HSI dual designation with Mike Wynn. And so that episode just really took me on a journey and a learning process of understanding and leveraging these unique opportunities and the challenges associated with both NAPCs as well as HSIs. And so one of the biggest things that I appreciated about the episode was that Mike took us on a process of just understanding what these designations mean beyond, what we learned about in the literature, demystifying some of the things that are out there, and also kind of taking a deep dive into like the funding and the resources that are available with both designations. And so I really appreciated that episode a lot. Another thing that really stood out to me from the episode was just the importance of being able to strategically navigate the dual designations and how institutions can create more inclusive and supportive and successful environments for both Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic students. Because a lot of times when we have these conversations around HSIs, HBCUs, or any other MSIs, it becomes so narrow. And I think that Mike really helped expand our thought process around these dual designations in a way that just really shook the room a little bit.
Hey, yes, I agree. Oh, I love that episode. I learned so much. And in the episode, I think I even say, like, I'm gonna have to listen again and take notes. I literally wrote like notes as I re-listened to that episode. So it's a good one. And as a little preview, we will be bringing you more dual designation episodes. One will feature HSI and HBCU. Yes, that's a thing. That's going to be coming up. I think we might dig deeper into the ANAPZ and HSI dual designation. So more to come on those sort of things.
Awesome. So now, of course, I have to throw it back to you. What is your favorite Pasa HSI episode on the Learning from HSI Directors summer playlist and why?
Yes. So that playlist is one of my favorites. All of those episodes are some of my favorites. I'm going to touch on multiples from that playlist, but I want to distinguish first between HSI directors and grant directors. I don't think we have distinguished clearly, but when we made that list, we noted that those differences were coming up. So there are two types of directors that we are talking about on the HSI podcast, on the Que Pasa HSI podcast, and in general. One is those people who implement Title V and Title III grants. Those are grant directors. Those are people who are making sure that they follow the grant exactly as it's written. They make sure they're spending the money as they've promised to the federal government. They're making sure they're meeting the goals and objectives, right? Like bringing in the right players to make sure that money is spent in the way it's supposed to be spent. And also those grants were created by the campus. So they could be doing any number of things based on what they wrote. Those are HSI grant directors. HSI directors, I guess we would say, just without that grant piece in, is much broader. Those are people who are not hired by grants, and they are instead hired as line items on campus to really drive HSI initiatives. One of our episode guests, Dr. Manny Del Real, actually said there were 8 HSI directors in the country, and I believe him. Is very few. There's not a lot of HSI directors who actually that's their sole job and that they're not only grant funded. So I think it's an emerging trend. And we're seeing more and more happen, or more and more grow. Even in my own system, the University of California system, UC Santa Barbara just hired an HSI director. UCLA has an HSI director, and several of our other UC campuses have HSI directors, and they're not even like UCLA isn't even an HSI yet, right? So those HSI directors are driving HSI initiatives without the grant funding. So I think that's going to be an important distinction as we see more HSI directors come on board. With that, I would say some of my favorite episodes from that list. Of course, Dr. Marla Franco is one of our queens, one of the ones we learn from all the time. For sure, her episode was season 1, episode 9, and she talks about being she's now a vice president of HSI Initiative. So she has a pretty high up position. And what I loved about her episode, along with one of her staff members, who is an HSI director, is Carla Cruz, season 4, episode 4. They both talk about relationship building. And I think that's something that theme across those 2 episodes is something I want to stress and put a exclamation point on, that HSI work cannot be done alone, that you need to build relationships on campus. And so your HSI director, when you're thinking about what kind of personality you need for that person, they need to be somebody that can build relationships across silos. Someone that can talk to people in the medical school, someone that can talk to people of all races and genders and ethnicities, right? People who are diverse, not just Latine, people who can talk to the math faculty, right? People who can talk to chemistry faculty, people who can talk to high-level VPs on campus, people who can talk to deans, people who can talk to funders. You need people who can build relationships across campus. So that should be a key like necessary characteristic of those HSI directors. So I love both of those episodes. Definitely listen. The other one that is for sure a favorite is season 4, episode 1. That's our Metro State University Denver episode with Dr. Mike Benitez and Dr. Manny Del Real, honoring the past and strategizing for the future. If you haven't listened to that episode, get a piece of paper and a pen and take notes. They lay out how they build an infrastructure for serving this. And also how they do that in collaboration with Dr. Benita's work, which is he's the VP of DEI, right? So how do those things not come into tension, but actually build on each other, right? That they can work collaboratively across those different dynamics that are happening on an HSI campus. So love that episode and definitely recommend it. So let's kick it back to another question for Alan. Which is your favorite Que Pasa HSI episode on the playlist called Critical Perspectives at HSIs?
Ooh, this is also a hard one because literally just hearing you talk about all of those episodes, I'm reminded of how good all of the episodes are. And so one of my favorite would be Anti-Blackness at HSIs with Whitney Pirtle, who is an associate professor at UC Merced, and she also directs the Sociology of Health Equity Lab. And so in this episode, Whitney talked about her experiences being one of 5 Black tenure track faculty members at HSIs and about how she stepped into research about anti-Blackness within HSIs. And it was just really profound, right? Because I think that the conversation around addressing anti-Blackness helps to promote a more inclusive and equitable campus environment for all students. And it kind of goes where people are hesitating to go sometimes with the conversations around HSIs, because with creating these identity-based initiatives or centers that seem singular, people don't understand that it's about collective liberation. And so a lot of times the perspectives and the responses can be very narrow. And so she really pushed the importance of us thinking more intersectionally about how many students at HSIs identify as both Hispanic and Black, and discussing how they navigate the anti-Blackness and so on their respective campuses. And so I really appreciated that first and foremost, but I also liked how at the core of the episode, she talked a lot about community building. And she even talked about how following the summer of 2020's racial reckoning, she kind of fell into this role because of her call to support students. And so navigating that challenge both personally and professionally, and how she was up for the challenge as an identity and race scholar. And so it was very enlightening. And so she left us with thinking about what long-term change looks like within HSIs. And so I think that there's a lot more work to do, but I'm excited and inspired by Whitney in that episode.
Yes, love it. I love that episode too, by the way. Such a good one. But I will say the Critical Perspectives playlist is like a must listen. All of those episodes are fire. So definitely listen to all those episodes. And there's several episodes on that playlist because there are such good critical perspectives that are brought to the podcast.
Literally. Yeah, that was a hard one to pick from. So next up on our summer playlist series is the Emergent HSIs playlist. And so can you tell us what is your favorite episode and why?
Yes. So I love emerging HSIs, I will say, because I think that in my work with HSIs, and that would include emerging HSIs, and what I call striving HSIs. I said it here first. I'm writing about it now, but I said it here. So cite me if you're going to use this term, but I call striving HSIs under 15% that are trying to get to 25%. And those institutions absolutely exist. And those campuses, I call them striving because they are trying to reach the 25% and they haven't even hit 15. So I think the striving and the emerging HSIs are doing some of the hardest work there is because they're trying to do 2 things at once. One, they're trying to get to the enrollment. And the enrollment is necessary. If you want to be HSI federally, you have to get to the enrollment. So there's that work. And there's a lot of work that doesn't even come into the servingness framework, like the recruitment, the outreach, the working with families, the financial aid advisors, getting them on board and making sure they're bilingual to talk to Spanish speaking parents, right? Like there is a lot of work that's going into that emergent process. And these campuses are doing that. They know that versus an HSI that's already 40, 50, 60%, they've already reached it. They don't spend as much time in that area. So they're doing the active process of hitting 25. And that takes a lot of work. And then they're also doing the active process of making the campus ready. And so that's what most of the other HSIs are doing is they're trying to get ready for a population that's already there. So really they're way behind. The emerging and the striving HSIs are actually at doing it at the right time. They're like, all right, we're going to get ready before we actually have the student population, right? So they're doing both at the same time, which is a ton of work. And so I think my favorite episode that talks about is season 4, episode 3, the HSI Now, advancing servingness in Wisconsin. And that episode features an area where you don't necessarily first think of HSIs. At least I didn't, in Wisconsin. I was like, Wisconsin? What the heck? They got Latinos in Wisconsin? Apparently they got a bunch, because they have several campuses. They have an alliance, which is called this HSI Now, that they are actively trying, and some of them are striving, some of them are emerging, and some of them are at HSI. So they cross all the different types of HSI in that group. And so they really talk about that. Alberto and Maldonado and Jackie Black are our guests on that episode. Some of my longtime friends, some people I've known a long time already, been doing this work for a long time with, in the struggle, literally with them for a long time. And they talk about all those dynamics of getting to 25% while getting ready, right? Both of those processes at the same time. I do also like season 5, episode 5 with Sandy Lopez, who really, she talks about undocumented students on that episode, but she's at an emerging HSI and they're doing all kind of HSI stuff. So I think that's another episode worth checking out. Yet there is a lot of work around, a lot of content on that episode about supporting undocumented students. So that one's a good one too, in the emerging HSI list.
I love that you just said that, because it makes me think about, it's not just about this numerical target, right? It's about creating a campus environment and a culture where students are served or where students are thriving. So shout out to you for that.
Yes. This is my scholar brain working all at the same time while I'm like thinking about these things, and really pushing like what do we need to be thinking about, right? What's happening at these places. So that's it for our summer reading list, although there are some more summer reading lists, or I guess summer listening lists, for you to check out. So please check them all out, but those are the ones we're going to touch on. So we're going to answer the difficult question that everybody has trouble answering. If you listen to the podcast regularly, you know the last question is always the same, and it's always hard for people because it's a tough question. And so I'm going to throw it at you, Alan. ¿Qué pasa, HSIs?
Ooh, the dreaded question. ¿Qué pasa, HSIs? Ooh. All right, so I'm gonna be a little bit controversial here, especially for the LA folks, and quote Aubrey Graham Drake. And I'm gonna say
In summer
I'm gonna say
2024?
I'm gonna say let's see what happens next. Let's see what
Mm,
happens next.
okay.
All right, so it's only fair that we turn the coin back over to you as well. So, Dr. Garcia, ¿Qué pasa, HSI?
Yes. That is a hard question. I never get to answer it at all. And it is a hard one, but I think my response is like, yeah, what's up? Right? That really is the question, is like, what's up? What are you doing? What are you doing differently that is going to make a difference? How are we going to get to these spaces of justice and liberation that I talk about, and all the things that I talk about HSIs in, if we don't do something different? If you just keep showing up and want to keep conforming to the normative ways of doing higher ed, conforming to the things that matter to us the most, like graduation and social mobility, which matters, without actually taking students' experiences into consideration, you ain't never going to be serving them the way you need to be serving them. So I'm gonna say that's what's up. We got to do the work. Roll up your sleeves and get to work. Boom, 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 boom.
Awesome.
And that's it for our summer episode. We hope y'all enjoyed this. And if you did, definitely drop us some notes, send us some love, and let us know if you would love for us to do more episodes like this, where we just talk and rap about what's on our minds about these episodes. Peace.